Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Buddhang dhammang sanghang namasami. Blessings. Good evening to you all. Very happy to be here on the first day of the new year. What better way to begin the year than by practicing Dhamma together, meditation, chanting, and listening to some teaching. One of the most common themes that run through the Buddhist teachings is the theme of practicing heedfulness, apamada. If you're familiar with the Dhammapada teachings that the Buddha gave, there's the verse Apamado amata padang, pamado majjuna padang. Heedfulness is the way to the deathless. Heedlessness is as if you're dead already. And it's a phrase that many teachers use, and it's one that kind of comes up, I think, at this time, the beginning of New Year, when it's a time when you think about your life, maybe what you've achieved so far, where you've come from to this point, and then what you hope to achieve for the coming year and the future. And it's a very simple direction from the Buddha, saying that when you're heedful, then you reach the deathless, which is in another way of putting it, that's the highest happiness and the highest thing you can attain in the Buddhist path, because the deathless is really nibbana. But it's pointing to the whole purpose of the Buddhist teachings is to awaken our minds to the truth and liberate them from the causes of stress, suffering, by being awakened to the truth. So heedfulness leads to the awakened state, or the deathless, that which doesn't die, that which doesn't arise and pass away, that which doesn't end. The opposite is heedlessness, carelessness, heedlessness, which is as if you're dead already, meaning you've lost your awakenedness, you're lost in the mental defilements that proliferate and condition this mind. So my teacher Ajahn Chah often talked about how a moment of mindfulness, which is not exactly the same as heedfulness but very close. A moment of mindfulness is a moment where your mind is awake and the potential for seeing the truth, understanding the truth, freeing the mind from suffering is there when you're mindful. But when you lose your mindfulness, which is like being heedless, it's as if you're dead. He'd say 5 minutes without mindfulness is like 5 minutes being dead. Why would he say that? Because any of you who practice meditation and practice Buddhism, you're probably aware, any day of the year, New Year's Day or any other day, there'll be moments when you're not mindful. And when you practice mindfulness meditation, you see that. When we're mindful, we're probably quite happy and content but much of our meditation practice is dealing with those moments when we're not mindful. We lose our awareness, we stop paying attention, and the mind drifts off into a train of thought, a mood, or sometimes just falling asleep. So Ajahn Chah said, no mindfulness is like a moment when your mind just dies, meaning you're no longer awake when you're not mindful or when you're not heedful. You're no longer awake, so you can't realize the truth, you can't free your mind from stress and suffering. Obviously, it's not what we want. If you're practicing the Buddhist path, you're practicing for the awakened state, so you don't want the unawakened state of when you're not mindful. And he would use this phrase sometimes with the monks, and if he noticed somebody being a bit unmindful, maybe falling asleep during their meditation or drifting off, when a monk would be doing something, a simple task, maybe sweeping leaves, but then his mind drifts off, Ajahn Chah might be nearby and see that or know that. Or two monks lost in conversation to the point where they're just not being mindful of where they are and what's going on, chit-chatting, socializing. All of these sort of situations, he might say, it's like your mind is dead to the truth, dead to the present moment at that time. Your mind is drifted away. Or one famous occasion, Ajahn Chah was eating his meal with the other monks, and one monk heard a forest chicken outside doing what forest chickens do, making its sound, clucking or crowing, cock-a-doodle-doo, moving around the forest. And this monk looks at the chicken and spends all his time looking at the chicken, forgets that he's eating, forgets what else he's doing, he's just looking at this chicken, thinking about the chicken. And Ajahn Chah is saying, you've lost your mindfulness. Now your mind has been born over there with that chicken. So it's like you've died from the present moment, and now you've been born as a chicken, just mentally. Obviously the monk is still a monk, he's not actually a chicken, but it's as if his mind has been born over there with the chicken. And he'd always been doing that, just quietly reminding the monks to be mindful, or to notice when they're not mindful, when they lose their mindfulness. And through our day, if you practice mindfulness, like we've had a retreat in the monastery here today, or if you have a session of meditation, or if you're just doing something, it could be driving your car or doing a job of work, washing the dishes, whatever, you'll notice how your mind drifts away from the present moment so easily. And that's like a moment of death. Your mind is going into death. It's no longer awake, it's now drifting into a train of thought, a mood. It's no longer present in the moment. So the beginning of New Year is a time to wake up, come back to the Dhamma, come back to the teachings of the Buddha, wake yourself up, maybe bring up that question, how am I spending my time today and generally in my life? Am I still aiming to practice the Dhamma and understand the Dhamma as the Buddha taught? Or am I letting my life drift? Because not only do we let our mind drift in a moment of time when we lose our mindfulness, moment by moment, but generally our life can drift, can't it? When we lose track or lose direction, sometimes we tell each other, we tell our friends, I think my life, I'm a bit lost at the moment, or I'm losing track of where I should be, I'm not where I should be in my life. And that's an expression of your mind that's drifted. And maybe if you keep losing mindfulness over and over again, well, you drift, literally you drift, don't you? You forget what the purpose of everything is, why you're here, what you're doing. You forget the Buddha, the Dhamma, the Sangha. But not just do you drift from your goal and your practice perhaps, but of course when your mind drifts, you're no longer mindful or no longer heedful, other things come in and take the place of mindfulness, and that's where the real danger lies. So you're probably all familiar with those times in your life when suddenly you have a very strong emotional state taking over your mind, and suddenly you become angry in a situation, or suddenly you're caught into anxiety and worry, or suddenly you're caught into some really big desire that takes over your mind and makes you very agitated. Where does all that come from? Well, that's what's filling your mind. When the mindfulness departs and leaves, then these more disturbing emotions, negative emotions, or what we call mental defilements, will replace the mindfulness and fill up your mind and come flowing back in. So the Buddha sometimes compared this quality of mindfulness as like the gatekeeper. So in the old days, a city would have walls with gates, and you have a gatekeeper on the gate. However many gates you have that many gatekeepers to check who's coming in and out of your city. I don't know if Singapore once upon a time maybe had a wall around it, but I think you understand the point. Old cities had walls with gates, and you needed to have a gatekeeper just in case the bad guys come in. The thieves, the enemy spies, whoever's going to cause you trouble, they may slip in through the gate if your gatekeeper is asleep or not doing his job. It's the same as our practice of Dhamma. We have to watch over our mind, and that gatekeeper, the mindfulness, the awakened state of mind, we have to keep cultivating that, developing that, so that we could look after our mind and ideally prevent these mental defilements rooted in greed, anger, and delusion slipping in without us realizing, so that we don't have to experience those moments where suddenly we're angry, suddenly we're afraid, suddenly we're caught up into some kind of state of desire that really is eating us up. It's mindfulness and the awakened state of mind that will protect against that. And so we all have to be the gatekeeper, the skilled, good gatekeeper doing his job or her job. And that's part of our practice. So maybe New Year's Day, you might set your goal for the coming year to maintain your vigilance, your heedfulness, your attentiveness to look after your mind for the coming year. Why? Because nobody else is going to do this job for us. This morning many people came to the temple, and last night at midnight they came for chanting, and many people go up to the Buddha statue, and you can see them praying, maybe asking Buddha for protection, for help. They want the Buddha, the blessing of the Buddha, to look after them. And in a small way, maybe it can be helpful in our life and be supportive, give us a boost at the beginning of the year. But if we're really honest, the Buddha can't really do this job of looking after our mind for us. We have to do it. Another way Ajahn described our mind, he said, if you're not practicing the Dhamma, you're not cultivating mindfulness, heedfulness, it's like your mind is like an orphan. It's like an orphan without parents. What's it like being an orphan? Well, most of us only know later in life, say if our parents die before us, then we become orphan. But by the time our parents die, hopefully we're already established, an adult, we know how to look after ourselves. But imagine a young boy or girl with no parents. It's a very sad thing. And an orphan, has no one to turn to. Hopefully they might have somebody who is takes on the role of their parents, but the mind is the same. Our mind, if we don't look after it, we don't train, practice, then our mind is like an orphan, and it just drifts through life, and we can get caught up into all kinds of wrong views, misunderstandings, all kinds of stress and suffering, because nobody is looking after it. Really, if you ever find you're experiencing some stress, you're getting upset about something, whatever, about relationship, or your health, or your work, or your money, whatever, at that time, it's as if your parents, meaning the Dhamma that you've heard and practiced, have left, and the stress has taken over. It's like your mind is like an orphan with no one looking after it. Hopefully it's not too long before the Dhamma comes back, and if you have some faith, maybe if you're stressed in your life, that's the time you go back to the practice of meditation, listening to the Dhamma, practicing kindness, generosity, doing the things that you know help you to bring up these good, skillful qualities. But unfortunately, sometimes people really forget, and even when they're stressed, they go in the wrong direction, following more of those mental defilements. They're already feeling stressed, and then they think they're going to remedy it in the wrong ways, and they go off and start drinking or gambling or doing something that they think will remove their stress, but actually makes it worse in the long run. So this mind of ours is it's the place where happiness comes, and we can develop a lot of happiness and good things with this mind, or it's the place where we experience stress. And when we're stressed, we're unhappy, we're depressed, we're angry, we're afraid, we're discontent. That's like, the parents of the mind, the Dhamma, the good qualities have left, if only temporarily. And the mind is just left to its own devices, and its own karma, but in a way that there's nothing guiding it. And that's what you might say the state of being unawakened or heedless. If there's no Dhamma guiding this mind, then we can get up to all kinds of problems and create all kinds of suffering very quickly. Even in one meditation period, you notice even somebody who's determined to practice the Dhamma, keeping precepts, practicing mindfulness for a period of time, trying to really watch their mind, look after their mind, you'll notice even in a period of meditation, it's possible for you just to get lost in your trains of thought, and sometimes you're just sitting quietly, physically you're just sitting quietly there on a meditation cushion, but a certain memory may come up and trigger some kind of reaction in your mind, and you might find suddenly you're feeling angry or anxious or worried. Even though you're actually meditating, looking after your mind in the best way you can, practicing mindfulness, it's still possible for these negative emotions to slip in so easily. So this is why we have to practice. This is the motivation, or the reason why we need to practice, is because we know our mind can easily slip away from the present moment and get lost in its moods, and you might say lost in stress. Even more so when we're doing other activities. It's hard enough to practice when we're sitting on the meditation cushion, but when you're working, or driving your car, or at home, going here, going there, suddenly you can find yourself lost in a mood or a state of stress quite quickly, quite easily. So when you notice that, that's like the wake-up call. That's the Buddha coming to you, or the Dhamma coming to you, saying you should get back to the practice. You've been asleep, or you've been lost or dead for a moment. Your mind has drifted away, and you become lost in your thoughts, lost in your moods. That's when it's time to come back to practice. Very frustrating, I know, because when we practice, the mind drifts away so easily. But really, I think we have no alternative no choice. We have to keep coming back to the practice. And you, I think, already have a certain commitment to the practice, some faith. That's why you're here. That's something you have to build on. And sometimes we call the practice the cultivation of the mind, cultivation of the Dhamma. Just like cultivating fields, if you're a farmer, the Buddha often compared the cultivation of Dhamma to cultivation of crops in a field. It takes regular effort, doesn't it? If you're going to grow a field of rice or wheat or some crop, you have to keep coming back to that field. You plant the seeds, you have to keep watering them, fertilizing, maybe pulling out the weeds, protecting from the birds or whatever. You have to keep doing it over and over again till that crop has grown strong, healthy, and then eventually you have to harvest it before the birds or the other animals get to it. It's a constant practice or a constant effort when you're cultivating crops in a field. And our mind is just the same. It's not like you come to the temple once on New Year's Day and then, okay, see you, we'll be back again next year. Or you do your meditation practice once, or you hear the Dhamma talk once, and then I'll be back next year to hear another talk. Of course, some people do that, but really it's a constant thing you have to keep returning to if you want to get the results, if you want to really progress and understand the Dhamma as the Buddha was teaching. Something you have to keep returning to. But having said that, when you say, it's something you have to keep doing, keep returning to, keep practicing, some people feel like, that's a big burden. I've got to keep doing this for the rest of my life. That's a lot of hard work. Oh dear, I don't have enough time because I have so many other things I have to do. I have to look after my family, and I've got my job, and all the different responsibilities I have. If I tell you you've got to practice for the rest of your life to bring the Dhamma up in your mind, you might think that's too much. But don't misunderstand. You can also see that the practice of Dhamma is just one moment at a time. One small moment is already a little victory in terms of practicing Dhamma. So one moment bringing attention to your mind, bringing up mindfulness, is already something very special, very good. And those little moments of goodness that you develop through your practice join up. They join up and become more continuous and more often, and gradually you develop something good, and your practice progresses almost unconsciously in a very subtle way. So don't underestimate the small moments of effort you put into your practice, even though if it may feel like you're a long way away from success in your Dhamma practice. You don't have to think like that. Just focus on today, focus on the present moment, and see what you can do to improve things right here, right now. That's how the Buddha taught. The Buddha taught that you practice in the present moment, and you bring your mind to pay attention to the present moment, right here, right now. And the present moment is, always there, because any time that you bring up a state of mindfulness in the present moment, you're with the present moment. You might notice in your mind, sometimes if somebody, a friend says, let's go and practice meditation, or go to the temple, do something good. Obviously that's a good thing they do when they say that, but in your mind you might have the feeling making good karma, making merit, meditation, doing something good is something you're going to do in the future, way off there. Or when you're meditating, you may think, one day when my meditation comes together, then I will attain some peace, some understanding way off, some distant point in the future. But really it's not like that, is it? The Dhamma is to be realized in the present moment, which means right here, right now, whatever you're doing, wherever you are. So every moment that you bring up some mindfulness is already something very special, very good. And you can do that right here, right now. And your mindfulness and your practice can cultivate in many directions as well. It's not just you have to meditate. You know, a moment of kindness, a kind thought is already a little victory. So if you have a kind thought in your heart, well, that's a victory over an angry thought. Kindness and anger cannot exist in your heart or your mind at the same time. So anytime you have a moment of kindness, already that's a victory. And that's just maybe just one small moment, one small victory, but that's how we practice. And those moments will condition or be the cause for more of those moments to come up. Or a moment of generosity, just one moment of thinking to share something with somebody else or help somebody else. Just one moment will be conditioning another moment of generosity, and it's a moment when you have victory over stinginess or selfishness. Or one moment of mindfulness is a victory over one moment of no mindfulness, heedlessness, you know, when you're lost in your thoughts or you're falling asleep. So try and see that the practice of the Dhamma is always taking place in the present moment, whenever that may be, whether it's right now or in 1 minute from now. It's right here, right now. So in that case, you always have the chance to practice the Dhamma. When you bring your attention back to the present moment, what you're doing right here, right now. Yesterday I was in NDR Meditation Center. We were having a retreat, and at lunchtime we went downstairs, and because there were Sangha there was monks there, we got everybody to line up, and they all had a spoonful of rice to put in the monks' bowls. Most people have done that before, so they understood, but there were a few newcomers, and so they were puzzled. They were given either a plate of rice or a spoonful of rice, and before the monks came along, they were wondering, what do I do with this? And one lady even ate her rice because she didn't understand, it's for giving to the monks. And another person thought, if I put one little spoonful of rice in the bowl of a monk, what good will that do? A monk needs much more than one spoonful of rice. What's the point of just putting a spoonful of rice in? But then she noticed later there were many people there. I don't know how many, maybe 60 or 70 people were there. And when the monks went down the line, just receiving one small spoonful of rice, by the end the bowl is full. Actually much more rice than one person can eat, so we have to tip some of it out and just save a portion for ourselves. And in the Buddhist world that happens every day. Wherever you have monks, there'll be people coming, either the monk goes out into town or people come to the temple and they offer rice and many other things. And there's always more than the monks need, and those little offerings, a little bit from many people, will always be too much. You'll fill the monk's bowl, give them more than they need. It's exactly the same with your Dhamma practice. A moment of mindfulness in the present moment, you might think, oh, what good is that? Okay, I'm mindful for a moment, but then I know later on I'll get lost again, daydreaming again, or lost in my thoughts again, or maybe I'll get angry or worried again. You might already undermine your own effort by seeing or looking down on one small moment of mindfulness, or one small act of generosity, or one small act of kindness. You might look down on that at the time because you think it's small and it's What good can this do to the world? What good does this do me? What good does this do for other people? But when you do it, and you keep doing it regularly, you'll start to notice these small moments, they have an effect, don't they? They have an effect on your mind because it becomes easier to practice. If you practice generosity just once, one spoonful of rice, the next time it'll be a little bit easier. One thought of kindness, the next time it will be a little bit easier to have a kind thought. One moment where you forgive someone because they've annoyed you or hurt you, but you forgive them, you say, I'm going to let it go, let it be. That will make it easier to forgive again. One moment when you're practicing mindfulness, you come to the breathing maybe, and you're mindful of your breathing, you pay attention to that. You might think, my mindfulness will disappear very quick. But if you keep doing it, it will make it easier for you to have more moments of mindfulness. That's how the practice develops. That's cultivating the crops in the field. Little moments of attention, bringing up the goodness in your heart, will keep developing good habits, a continuity, a momentum in your life, in your mind, and it'll get easier. And some of that stuff will stick. Whereas before, maybe it was when you first encountered Buddhist practice, maybe you've never done any dana offering before, never listened to Dhamma before, never meditated before. It might have seemed quite difficult and challenging in the beginning. But if you've already been doing it for a period of time, whether it's months or years, you'll know already that it gets easier, doesn't it? Because of repeated practice, you learn things and you get better at it. And if you keep going, that's going to continue. So it's based on this principle of repeated practice, repeated cultivation of good qualities, that we can change our mind for the better. And that changes our life for the better. This is the principle that the Buddha was basing his teachings on. You might call it the principle of karma. Good karma, repeated good karma, brings its results. And your mind opens up, becomes happier, has more of a store of good qualities in it because of repeated practice. In Thailand, where I used to live, you look at a Buddha statue, often the reflection that comes up in Thai, they say, excuse me, Pu Ru, Pu Dön, Pu Bek Ban. There's three qualities you attribute to the Buddha. Pu Ru means the awakened one. Pu Ru means the one who has knowing, awareness, knowing. Pu Dön means the awakened one. Pu Bek Ban means to flourish or bloom. It's a word they use with a flower, like the lotus. When the sun hits the lotus opens, or any other flower, it blooms because of the sun. Bek Ban means like the mind that is flourishing, open, and really it means enjoyment. Just as you look at a flower and you enjoy the beauty of a flower, a blooming flower, when your mind opens or it's awake, it's in the state of knowing or awareness, then it opens, so it's like enjoy it. It's enjoyable. So when we look at the Buddha, we often remember those qualities. How did they come about for the Buddha? Well, they came about through many, many years of practice. Really, you could say many lifetimes of practice. I know for some people maybe they're not yet fully confident in the teaching of karma and rebirth. But the principle still applies just for one life. If you keep practicing, then little by little your mind starts to awaken to the truth. Good qualities start to become established, they become habitual. Your mind starts to bloom like a flower. Your life becomes more enjoyable, happier. This is how the Buddha taught. If you keep repeatedly practicing what I teach, your mind is going to improve for that. Or another way of looking at it is also like, we call it factor replacement. A very kind of scientific word, factor replacement. What does that mean? Well, if you keep bringing up thoughts of kindness, for example, or compassion, for example, that means anger or cruelty cannot be in your mind when you have a thought of kindness or compassion. So if you keep doing that, mindfully cultivating kindness, compassion, generosity, sensitivity to others, the more selfish, angry, cruel trains of thought that you may have suffered with in the past will decrease, because there's no room for them in your mind. At the moment you have a thought of kindness, it replaces, this is the factor replacement, it replaces a thought of anger. So if you become really determined to bring up a thought of kindness and keep bringing up those thoughts of kindness, then the thoughts of anger are going to have no room, or they'll come up less and less in your mind, in your heart. And here I'm talking generally, not just when you're with your best friend or your family member who you love and it's easy to be kind with. Of course, we'll have kindness for our child or our parent or somebody that we really love. I'm talking here more generally. When you go to work, when you go to work in the morning and you're driving your car, cultivating kindness then when you meet with that driver who is not driving very well, or drives too close to you, or blocks you, or does something on the road, or when you walk into your workplace and there's somebody there who in the past they don't cooperate with you and they annoy you all the time. These are the sort of times I'm talking about. We all know it's easy to be kind, have a moment of kindness for someone you love or someone you're happy with. I'm talking more about those moments when you are with someone you don't have natural affection for or kindness for. That's where you have to practice. That's where you have to cultivate this factor replacement. And maybe at the very beginning of your car journey to work or wherever else you're going, I would recommend you lift your hands up in Anjali. Some people even have a little statue, a Buddha or a picture of a teacher or Buddha in their car to remind them. They lift their hands up and say, whatever happens today, I'm not going to give in to my anger during this journey. If anger arises, I will let it go and I'll replace it with kindness, tolerance, friendliness. You start your journey like that, and sure, along the way there'll be challenges. Maybe not so much in Singapore, because Singapore driving quite good and everybody is quite well behaved generally. But in other countries, not always the case. And even in Singapore, sometimes people drive badly, don't they? So there'll be those challenges, those times when you're driving and the mind goes to annoyance with other drivers, or maybe not even with other drivers, maybe thinking ahead of who you will meet today in the course of your day, and just remembering who you might have to meet, already anger arises. That's the challenge. Can you bring up the kindness, let go of that anger when the situation arises that pokes you or brings you that negative train of thought? Or even when you go into work or you go somewhere where there are people and straight away you see someone who previously has stimulated anger in you. Can you maintain your mindfulness? Can you let go of your anger when you see that person? You notice when you're not mindful, already the trains of thought are put into motion. You see that person, already you're remembering why you get annoyed with them, because every time you work with them, they never cooperate, or they're always very selfish, or they cause you some trouble in some way. Just seeing them already, that's prompted that way of negative thinking. That's your challenge, isn't it? Can I maintain mindfulness as I go to work or go to that place, go to my reunion dinner and see that person who always annoys me, whatever the situation. Can you maintain your mindfulness and your kindness in those situations? I always remember a funny story, true story. I was with another monk in the temple, monastery one day, and this monk had a problem with another monk in the monastery. This other monk was kind of like his rival, or we say enemy, but monks are not really bad enemies. We don't fight or hurt each other, but still, even as a monk, sometimes you have negative thoughts to another monk. Maybe they have a different way of looking at things than you, different character, different disposition. So even monks sometimes don't get on so well together. Usually it's more junior monks. When you become more senior, you've learned to let go of this, usually. Anyway, on this occasion, I was with one monk, and a monk came near, and this monk, my friend, he thought the monk who was coming near to him was a monk who was his friend. So he called out to him and said, "Hi there, friend." Call him friend for now. And he was very smiling, "Hi there, friend, venerable friend. What are you doing, or where are you going?" But then the monk turned, and it was the monk that he thought was his enemy, or treated like his enemy. So it was a moment of confusion, or just a moment of misunderstanding. He's seen a monk who's his friend, and then the monk turns, and it turns out to be the one he doesn't get on with, but he's already displayed friendship to him. And everyone notices, these two monks, normally they don't get on so well together. They're a bit cool towards each other. But today he's seen him first as a friend. It was a misperception, a misunderstanding. And he's turned and he realized, this is the monk I usually see as enemy. But I've already smiled to him and said hello. It's like unexpected. Suddenly you're caught in your own mood of being friendly to someone you would normally not be so friendly to. And the monk said he had a really good insight then. It's like, even if your enemy approaches you, but you bring up this friendly mood, you can drive out your anger and you can establish friendship with someone who you normally see as an enemy. It's possible. And because of a mistaken identity at that occasion on that day, it worked. And he treated his enemy as a friend, and he realized, I've got to let go of all my negative perceptions of this person because I've seen I can do it. So from now on, I'm not going to perceive them as an enemy or someone I don't like. I can see them with friendliness. I can work with them. I can be with them. It's okay. So for that monk, he had a really good insight into the impermanence of perception and how to change your thought, your feeling from anger back to friendliness, even when you confront something you don't like. In this story, it's another monk, but it could be your work colleague or your family member who you don't usually get on well with, or it could be the cockroach hiding in the corner of the kitchen or something that you're normally annoyed with or react with anger towards. This is where you have to practice bringing up the loving kindness, bringing up the tolerance, the friendliness. It just depends for you what it may be. I've given you an example of seeing a friend or seeing someone who you normally see as an enemy, mistaking them as a friend and being friendly to your enemy, and giving rise to a liberating letting go of anger. That was the example I've given. But you may have your own example where you've worked on being friendly or letting go of some anger towards someone, and maybe at first you can't do it, but you work at it until one day you see this person who you normally see as an enemy, suddenly you see quite normally, or even you can see them as a friend, and your mind changes. And we can do that as human beings. Your view, your perception can change if you treat it well. You look after your mind, and you bring up thought of kindness, so then you can be like that driver who saw that he had a problem with other drivers. He's always getting annoyed going along the road, complaining, and he just was living with a mind full of negativity because of other drivers. He said, that's it, I'm fed up being angry driving. From now on, I'm going to cultivate loving kindness towards other drivers. And he did it. And he said he just, every day he got in his car, may all drivers be well, may all drivers be free from suffering. And he worked on that one because that was his particular weakness. And he got to the point where driving on the road, he just wishes everybody well. May you be well, may you be happy. Even that guy who drives too fast or too close or carelessly, may he be well, may he get home safely. Whoever, good driver, bad driver, mediocre driver, ordinary driver, young, old, male, female, whoever, may they all be well. And he kept doing that until it just became normal for him. And he said after that, he had a change in his way of thinking about other drivers. And he started to see them as just people, like family, like relatives, and you just wish them well. You probably all got a relative who drives badly, but maybe because they're your relative, you don't hold on to any anger because you just, oh, that's so-and-so. They drive badly, I just have to put up with them. And sometimes you sit in the car with them and it's like, oh, they're driving again, and you're biting your tongue and but you forgive them and let go because it's your relative or your friend. Now you're doing the same, but now with anybody, strangers, people you know, people you don't know. That's your goal, isn't it? You're moving from loving kindness, which is maybe very narrow, just for your close family, friends, and you expand out through the practice, training your mind to let go of some of the biases, the attachments to these negative perceptions, to the anger. Get to the point maybe where you can have kindness, friendliness to everyone you meet. You go out tomorrow, say, into Singapore. Can you maintain your kindness, friendliness for everyone you meet tomorrow? Maybe you can, which is good. Or maybe there's just one person makes it a bit difficult for you. Maybe just one. Or maybe there's many people you can think of. Everyone's karma is different. But you probably get the idea. Tomorrow you have a challenge now. This is the challenge I'm giving you for your practice. Can you go out and maintain your mindfulness, your loving kindness, your friendliness from the start of the day to the end? Whether you're driving, you're on the bus, you go to work, into an office or some workplace, or even if you come here. Can you maintain these wholesome qualities for a day? Some people may say, and I know people like this, they say, oh, a whole day is too much. I know I can't succeed. Okay, we'll come right back down to the present moment, right here, right now. Can you bring up a thought of kindness right here, right now, just for a few moments? Can you do that? And I think you can. Everyone can do that. Okay, once you've achieved that, well, we'll expand it from one moment to a few moments, to a few minutes, and then we'll keep working on it. And this is how we practice. This is how the Buddha practiced from the very first time when he had that thought, I wish to become a fully awakened Buddha for the benefit of all beings. What you might call the Bodhisattva's wish or aspiration. And from that moment he kept building on his barami, his spiritual qualities, until the eventual moment when he became the Buddha. But that's many moments of effort in the practice, training his mind, cultivating these different qualities over and over again until they are perfected and become barami. So don't underestimate what you're doing in your practice. You go out to work tomorrow if you're going to work. You're going to practice cultivating barami as you do it. And some days you may fail. You may come home from work and got really stressed today, and I got angry and I lost my mindfulness, or I had a disagreement with somebody, whatever. There'll be some days when you forget yourself or you lose it. But you start again, you re-establish your commitment to the practice, you start again, re-establish your mindfulness, re-establish your loving kindness, and you keep bringing up these barami over and over again. This is how the Buddha practiced, until those barami didn't disappear anymore, until they're established. So you can imagine, once somebody is fully awakened like a Buddha, they don't have a moment where they get angry with other people anymore. It's gone. Leading up to that, leading up to being a Buddha, he would have moments when he'd get angry, or when he was a bit selfish or greedy in some way. You read the previous life stories of the Buddha, maybe he was already attained some good qualities. He's a monk or a practitioner in the forest meditating, already attained samadhi, and he's got practice of effort, renunciation and loving kindness, but then he falls down and falls in love with someone, and loses his practice for a while, loses his steadiness of mind because he falls in love. Or maybe at another time he gets angry with someone, and he gets so angry that he has a fight and loses all his good qualities for a while. We've all experienced that, and we probably will experience it again. We have to be quite patient with this practice. We're all like the Bodhisattva. These are the ups and downs, the challenges of the practice of training this mind. But all you can do is keep coming back to it, keep coming back to the training, re-establishing your kindness when you get angry, re-establishing your generosity when you become too selfish or attached to something, re-establishing your mindfulness when you get completely lost and confused with life. You just have to keep coming back to the present moment and start again, over and over again. But each time you do that, you're reducing the amount of effort you'll have to make to do it again and again and again. Little by little, your mind understands more and more what you have to do. And that's how the Buddha practiced. It's not the Buddha or any enlightened teacher that you have met or read about, heard about. They've had to be practicing in this same way. Nobody gets it easy from day one when it comes to practicing Dhamma. Everybody has to go through difficulties. Everybody has to keep falling on their face and then picking themselves up, getting angry and then starting again, forgiving that person, re-establishing their mindfulness. Everybody has got lost and then has come back to the path. When I was a young monk, we compared the practice of Dhamma to walking through the rice fields in the morning. We used to walk out of the forest, across the rice fields to the village to collect our rice. And you walk through these rice fields, especially in the rainy season. It's muddy and the fields are full of water. They've got rice plants in them, but they're full of water. And even the high part, the ridge that you walk on, is slippery because of the mud and the rain. So your goal is to be able to walk through the rice fields on the ridge, not fall into the water. And most days you could achieve that, but if you're ever not very mindful or careless, you fall. You get your robe muddy and wet, and you go back to the monastery and everyone sees he fell. He's got muddy stains on your robe. And that's like the path of practice. There'll be those times where you fall into the mud, and then you just got to pick yourself out again, carry on. And most days you're successful because you're careful, but any day you're not careful, plop, you're in the water, you get mud on you. And you just have to accept that and you start again. And that's life, isn't it? Through your practice. Moments when you lose mindfulness, you become angry, you become greedy, you become confused or afraid. Okay, we've all experienced that, but you pick yourself up and you carry on. Actually, there was even one thing worse than that. when I was in northeast Thailand, the worst thing was falling into the paddy field and you got water up to your knees and some mud. Worse than that was when I went to live with another teacher, Lumpur Anand, who lives in Rayong on the coast. And the town there, we sometimes would go arms round in the town. And one year they started doing stormwater drains because they were getting flooded every year in the rainy season. And down the street they dug this stormwater channel really deep, like several meters down, and then they covered the road and they just have these drains to take the water away so the streets wouldn't flood and the people's homes and shops wouldn't flood. But before they finished it, there were all these holes where the drains were and there was nothing on top. And then the floodwater had come, and because the drainage system's not working yet, you'd be walking in the floodwater and it might be like 1 foot deep, but you can't see because it's really dirty floodwater. You get dead fish and squid and crabs floating, and you're walking along and you're like, oh, I don't want to walk in this water, but you've no choice. And then unfortunately some monks, not very mindful, and they walk and they're striding along, and then and not just up to the knee, up to the neck. They go right down into the drain and they're completely covered in this horrible water. And we have to pull them out, help the other monks, have to help them out, get them out again, and they're completely soaked. Luckily it wasn't for very long before they fixed it, but there was a short period of time where some of us went right down, right to the neck, and come out again. That's like your practice, when something really goes wrong. Everything goes wrong. Maybe you have health problem, money problem, relationship problem, family problem, and you're full of something. You're angry, or you're worried, or you're stressed. That's like, you've fallen right down the drain. And you come to the temple and the monks give you some chanting and you hear the talk, and it's like us pulling you out of the drain and you get back up again. You're covered in mucky water for a while, and then you clean yourself up and you carry on practicing again. Sometimes it's like that, isn't it? You just have to accept it. Life, sometimes you go right down, but you can always pull yourself up again. It's not like the end of the story. You may be smelly and unpleasant, but after a while you pull yourself up and you carry on. That's life, isn't it? So sometimes you're in the mud, sometimes you go right down the drain, but then you pick up and you carry on. Even the Buddhas had that. You read the stories of the Buddha's life, previous life. Sometimes he got murdered, he got killed. Sometimes he got people very jealous of him, imprisoning him or giving him every kind of insult, taking away his wealth, taking away his loved ones, killing his loved ones. Well, however bad it can be, the Buddha's been through it already, worse than us too, and maybe many times over. So when you hear that, you realize my problems maybe are not so bad. Okay, a few obstacles, the difficulties, but it's not that bad. The Buddha's been through worse. Ajahn Chah, my teacher, he's been through worse. He almost died many times in his practice. He was in a time when there's no medical help for forest monks, so they get malaria, they got no medicine. You just have to sit it out until they recover or die. No good food. Food was very simple and not very much of it. Even just getting robes was difficult. One difficulty after another. You read his biography, you'll realize, Ajahn Chah went through a lot. The Buddha went through a lot. Our problems are fairly small, I think. A few small things. Somebody doesn't like us, jealous of us at work or something, or somebody doesn't love us as much as we would like them to love us, or we got, our money we don't have enough money at some point to get what we want. These problems are very small, I think. So remember that. When you're needing some strength, just think of the Buddha, think of Ajahn Chah, and it will help you to get through your problems. And keep training your mind, bringing up these good qualities. Bring up the mindfulness, bring up the compassion, the kindness, bring up the wisdom, reflect on these things. you'll get through, you'll improve. So maybe I've talked enough for tonight. I'll leave that with you as an offering. Monks, we don't have much to offer you. We don't have any material things, but we can give you the Dhamma teaching. So I'll give you that as a New Year's gift tonight. Sadhu.